There's something I need to tell you about October. Something that's been keeping me awake at night. Something most people won't see coming until it's too late. Drop a comment saying ready if you want to know what's really happening in October. This information isn't for everyone. I wake up at 3 a.m. almost every night now. I stare at data on my phone, numbers that tell a story about October 2025 that most people can't read yet. October will be different from any month you've experienced before, not because of one big event, but because several important systems in our daily lives will start changing all at once. Let me tell you exactly what I'm seeing in the data. I was at the grocery store last Tuesday. An elderly woman ahead of me in line had to put back her medicine. "I can't afford all this anymore," she told the cashier. Her hands were shaking. I paid for her items when she wasn't looking, but I kept thinking, what happens next month when prices jump even higher? I can't help everyone. That moment has stayed with me. That woman represents millions of people who have no idea what's coming in October. The hardest part of knowing what's ahead has been watching people make plans for November and December. My mother called me last week about a big family gathering she's planning for Thanksgiving. My neighbor talked about the Christmas presents she's already buying for her grandchildren. My coworker described the vacation he's saving for next spring. They all assume the world in those months will work just like it does today. The data I'm looking at tells a very different story. Starting in October, 3 critical systems we all depend on will begin changing in ways most people aren't prepared for. First, the money system. I don't mean complicated things like stock markets. I mean the simple act of buying what you need. The same $100 bill that buys your groceries today won't get you as much in October. Not just a little less, noticeably less. I first noticed strange patterns in prices about 6 months ago. Small signs that most people wouldn't catch. Companies quietly adjusting their delivery schedules. Government meetings being moved up. Important people making unusual changes to where they keep their money. Last week, I received information that confirmed everything I suspected. I sat in my kitchen at 2:30 a.m., reading the data over and over, hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about all the people who have no idea what's coming, especially older folks living on fixed incomes, people like your parents. The second big change involves things we buy every day. Some items you're used to finding easily might not be on shelves when you need them. Not everything at once, but important products might become hard to find. Medicine, certain foods, parts to fix things in your home. I've been quietly preparing my own family. We have extra food that stays good for a long time, medicine we might need, some cash at home instead of just in the bank. My children have noticed these changes and asked questions. My daughter found me storing extra water bottles in the garage. "Daddy, why do we need all this water? Is something bad going to happen? How do you answer that question?" I told her we were just being extra careful. But children sense when adults are worried. They feel it even when we don't say it out loud. The third change involves energy, electricity, heating, gas for your car. Service might become less reliable than we're used to. Not huge blackouts like in movies, but smaller problems that make daily life more complicated. I watched my elderly neighbor struggling after a brief power outage last week. Her medical device needed to be reset. She was confused and frightened. I helped her, but kept thinking, what happens when these outages become more common in October? When they last longer? When they happen during cold weather? The weight of carrying this knowledge has been heavy. When friends talk about their plans for late fall and winter, I smile and nod, but inside I'm wondering if they'll be able to do those things when systems start changing. 3 nights ago, I couldn't sleep again. I sat in my kitchen thinking about all the elderly people on fixed incomes. They assume their retirement money will maintain its value. They expect the power to stay on consistently through the cold months ahead. They have no idea what the data is showing about October. I decided then that I had to share what I know, even if some people think I'm overreacting, because being prepared could mean everything for people on fixed incomes or with health needs. I've noticed something interesting in my research. The people who are most aware of what's coming in October aren't average citizens. They're people with special knowledge. Government officials are quietly changing emergency response plans, moving deadlines up, scheduling important meetings earlier than normal. Financial advisors to wealthy clients are shifting investments in unusual patterns, moving money to different kinds of accounts. suggesting clients keep more cash available. Supply chain managers for big companies are ordering extra inventory, changing delivery schedules, making backup plans for when primary suppliers can't deliver. These people aren't panicking. They're not building bunkers or moving to remote locations. They're simply making sensible adjustments based on information most people don't have access to. I've spent my career building systems that spot patterns others miss. It's how I've succeeded in industries that seemed impossible to change. Now I'm seeing patterns that have nothing to do with business opportunities. They're about changes that will affect how you live day to day. Last month, I had a conversation with someone at one of the largest food distribution companies in the country. He told me something that kept me up for 2 nights straight. "We've been told to prepare for major disruptions starting in mid-October," he said. "Not like anything we've seen before. Problems getting certain foods from farms to processing plants to stores, issues with refrigeration systems, delays in transportation networks, all hitting at once." He wasn't panicking either. He was calmly preparing his company for a different reality. One where the smooth systems we've all taken for granted don't work the same way anymore. What makes October different isn't that any single system will completely break down. It's that multiple systems will be under pressure at the same time, creating problems that cascade from one area to another. When energy systems have hiccups, food delivery gets complicated. When food costs more, people have less money for other necessities. When medicine is harder to find, health problems become more serious. Each problem makes the others worse. I keep thinking about people who are most vulnerable to these changes. Elderly people living alone, families already struggling to make ends meet, people with health conditions that require consistent care, children depending on adults who may be overwhelmed by new challenges. These are the people I see when I close my eyes at night. The ones who will be most affected by changes they didn't see coming and couldn't prepare for. That's why I'm making this video now, while there's still time to get ready. Not to create fear, but to help you prepare in simple, practical ways. Keep extra food that stays good without refrigeration. Make sure you have any medicine you need. Save some cash at home in case banking systems have temporary problems. Get to know your neighbors better. They may be your best support when systems work differently. None of these preparations are extreme or expensive. They're the kind of sensible steps that help during any disruption, whether it's a winter storm or a more prolonged change in how our systems work. The most important preparation isn't physical at all. It's mental. The people who will handle October best aren't those with the most money or supplies. They're the ones who can adapt when things work differently than expected. I look at my children playing and know they'll grow up in a world different from the one I knew. Not worse, just different, where flexibility matters more than following old patterns. The hardest conversation I've had recently was with my own mother. She showed me her calendar for November and December, filled with travel plans, family events, and volunteer activities. She was so excited, so sure everything would work just like always. I wanted to tell her everything I knew, but I was afraid of frightening her unnecessarily. Instead, I just suggested she might want to be a bit more careful with her planning. Maybe have some backup options, just in case. The look she gave me, half concern, half dismissal, is the same look most people have when they sense changes coming but don't want to believe them. "Elon, you always think something dramatic is about to happen," she said, patting my hand. "Remember when you were worried about the power grid 2 years ago? Everything turned out fine." She's right. I've seen concerning patterns before that didn't lead to major disruptions. That's why I've been hesitant to share what I'm seeing now. But the evidence for October is stronger than anything I've tracked before. The patterns are clearer. The signals are coming from more sources. The timeline is more specific. I didn't sleep well after that conversation with my mother. I kept thinking about her medicine cabinet, filled with prescriptions she depends on, about her retirement account, carefully planned to last exactly as long as she needs it to, about her home in a neighborhood where neighbors barely know each other. If October brings the changes I expect, her carefully organized life could become much more complicated very quickly. Not because of one big disaster, but because several small systems she depends on won't work quite the way she expects. That's what keeps me up at night. Not fear of catastrophe, but concern for all the people who will be caught unprepared for a different kind of world. A world where the reliable systems we've built our lives around become less reliable all at once. I've had to accept that I can't convince everyone to prepare. Some people will dismiss these warnings until they experience changes themselves. That's human nature. We struggle to imagine a future very different from our present. But for those who are listening, there's still time to take simple steps that could make an enormous difference in how you experience what's coming. Start with the basics: food, water, medicine, some cash at home. Then move to the less obvious preparations. Knowing your neighbors. Having backup plans for communication if normal channels become less reliable. Understanding how to stay warm if heating systems have problems. Most importantly, prepare yourself mentally for a world where things don't always work the way you expect, where you might need to be more flexible, more patient, more creative in solving everyday problems. The people throughout history who have navigated great changes successfully weren't those with the most resources. They were those who could adapt most quickly to new realities, who could let go of how things should work and focus on how things actually work in the moment. October is coming, ready or not. The only question is whether you'll face it prepared or unprepared. I made this video because I believe you deserve the chance to prepare, even if that preparation proves unnecessary, even if you think I'm overreacting, even if you're skeptical about whether these changes will really happen. Because the cost of preparing is small, but the cost of being caught completely unprepared could be enormous. And remember, this isn't about fear. It's about being ready for a world that's changing whether we like it or not. Last night, I sat with my son in our backyard, looking at the stars. He asked me if the world would be different when he grows up. I told him yes, it would be. I told him change is part of life, that humans have always had to adapt to new conditions. "Are you scared about the changes, Dad?" he asked. I thought carefully before answering. "I'm concerned," I said finally, "but not scared. Because I know we can handle changes if we're prepared for them, if we face them together." He seemed satisfied with that answer. Children are often better at accepting change than adults. They haven't yet built their lives around systems they expect to remain constant. That's the approach I'm trying to take toward October. Not fear, but preparation. Not panic, but readiness. Not isolation, but community. The world after October won't be unrecognizable, but it will be different in important ways. Ways that will challenge people who aren't expecting change. Ways that will reward those who have prepared themselves practically and mentally. You now have information most people won't understand until they experience these changes themselves. What you do with this information is up to you. I want to tell you about someone who changed how I think about all this. Last month, I met an elderly woman named Margaret at a small cafe near my office. She was 92 years old, with bright eyes that seemed to see right through you. I noticed her watching me as I worked on my laptop, analyzing the same patterns I've been telling you about. Something about her gaze made me feel like she knew what I was doing. After a while, she came over to my table. "You look worried, young man," she said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation, like someone carrying a heavy secret. I was startled by how accurately she'd read me. We started talking, and somehow I found myself telling her about the patterns I was seeing for October, about my concerns for vulnerable people, about my struggle with whether to share what I knew. Instead of dismissing me or getting frightened, she smiled with a kind of peaceful wisdom. "I lived through the Great Depression as a child," she told me. "I saw what happened to people who weren't prepared for big changes. The difference wasn't just about money or resources, it was about mindset." Margaret explained that her family had noticed early warning signs in 1929, months before the crash. Her father had been watching patterns in banking and markets, just like I was doing now. "My father wasn't rich or powerful," she said. "He was just observant. He noticed things changing before most people did, and he took simple steps to prepare our family. They had stored extra food, saved a little cash at home, planted a bigger garden than usual, built stronger connections with neighbors. Simple steps that made an enormous difference when systems started failing." The interesting thing, Margaret said, leaning closer, was how people reacted emotionally. Those who were completely surprised by the changes felt victimized. They became bitter, frightened, angry. But those who had some warning, who had time to prepare mentally and practically, they approached the same challenges differently, with more creativity, more resilience, more community spirit. She took my hand, her skin paper thin, but her grip surprisingly strong. If you see something coming that others don't, telling them isn't causing fear, it's offering a gift, the gift of time to prepare, the gift of agency instead of victimhood. Even if the changes aren't as severe as you expect, helping people become more resilient is never a bad thing. As Margaret got up to leave, she said something I'll never forget. Throughout history, every major change has separated people into two groups: those who recognized what was happening early enough to adapt, and those who denied the changes until they were overwhelmed by them. The difference wasn't intelligence or resources, it was simply paying attention and having the courage to act on what you saw. That conversation with Margaret gave me the clarity I needed. I realized that sharing what I know about October isn't about creating fear. It's about offering people the same gift that Margaret's father gave her family: the gift of time to prepare, the gift of meeting change with readiness instead of shock. A week after meeting Margaret, I ran into her again at the same cafe. This time, she brought a small leather-bound book with her, her father's journal from 1929 through 1933. "I want you to see this," she said, carefully turning the yellowed pages. My father documented everything: the signs he noticed before the crash, the preparations he made, and how our family navigated those difficult years. What struck me most as I read through the journal wasn't the financial strategies or practical preparations, though those were important. It was the emotional journey her father described. His initial anxiety as he recognized approaching problems, his struggle with whether to warn friends and family, his eventual decision to share what he knew, despite being ridiculed by some. Most powerful were the entries from after the crash, when those same people who had dismissed his warnings came to him for help and guidance. "My father never said, 'I told you so,'" Margaret explained. "He simply helped everyone he could, whether they had listened to him earlier or not. But he wrote here that the greatest gift he gave wasn't food or money. It was helping people understand that they could adapt and rebuild, even when the world changed in ways they hadn't expected." Margaret showed me one passage that I photographed with her permission. It read, "The true measure of preparedness isn't how much you've stored away, but how quickly you can adjust your thinking when old patterns no longer work. Those who cling to how things should be suffer the most. Those who can accept what is and work from there find ways forward, even in the darkest times." She told me her father had been an ordinary engineer, not wealthy or powerful, just thoughtful and observant. He had noticed small changes in banking practices, unusual movements in markets, and subtle shifts in how business leaders were behaving. Just like the patterns I've been tracking for October. He wasn't a prophet or a genius, Margaret said. He simply paid attention to signals others ignored, and he cared enough about his family and community to take action based on what he saw. Before we parted that day, Margaret shared one last insight that has stayed with me. The people who thrived during those difficult years weren't just the ones who had stockpiled resources, she said. They were the ones who maintained hope and purpose, who found ways to help others rather than just protecting themselves, who saw opportunity in changing conditions rather than just loss and deprivation. She squeezed my hand again with that surprising strength. If you're going to warn people about what's coming in October, make sure you give them more than fear. Give them a vision of how they might not just survive these changes, but find new purpose and meaning through them. That's what my father did for our family and neighbors, and it made all the difference. I've carried Margaret's wisdom with me through these weeks of deciding whether to share what I know. Her story reminded me that preparation isn't just about physical resources, it's about mental and emotional readiness for a world that works differently than we expect. October is coming. The changes it brings will challenge many people who aren't prepared. But those changes also create opportunities for those who can adapt quickly, who can let go of old expectations, who can find new ways to contribute when familiar patterns no longer work. Share this with someone who needs to see beyond the mainstream narrative about October and understand what's really coming. Subscribe for insights that most people won't have access to until after the changes have already begun. What signs have you noticed that suggest October might be different from what everyone expects?